You can please start taking your seats, I would really appreciate it. Don't be shy, you can come sit up here. You're just going to sit in the back row. I see you. Come on up. So once again, good evening. I'm Dr. Andrea Guzman Oliver, Associate Vice President for Student Outreach and Assessment, and I have the distinct honor of welcoming you to the 2016 MLK Diversity Address, entitled Advancing the Dream Together. This theme is symbolic because perhaps more than ever there is a need to come together to not only acknowledge and recognize social wrongs, but to seek solutions for the advancement of mankind and a better world for everyone. Martin Luther King Jr. stated, and I quote, "We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must make the pledge that we will always march ahead. We cannot turn back," unquote. And to that end, we gather here today. On behalf of Florida Atlantic University, our president, Dr. John Kelly, our vice president, Dr. Corey King, our executive leadership team, and the entire Division of Student Affairs, I formally welcome you to the 2016 Martin Luther King Diversity Address, Advancing the Dream Together. It is my sincere hope that as you listen to today's address, you leave inspired and that you develop new perspectives and new ideals that will serve to empower you to make that pledge to always march forward and seek solutions for a better society. Without further ado, I invite Dr. Claire Good, Associate Vice President and Dean of Students, to provide opening remarks. And as she comes up here, let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Good. She joined Florida Atlantic University as our Associate Vice President of Student Affairs and Dean of Students on June 1st, 2015. She is a member of the Student Affairs Leadership Team and provides oversight to a number of departments, including New Student Orientation, Wepner Center for Lead and Service Learning, and Parent and Family Programs. As Dean of Students, Dr. Good serves as a student advocate and guides our student conduct process. She was instrumental in the development of our Beyond Food program, an initiative to assist hungry students on campus and provide long-term solutions in meeting our students' nutritional needs. Additionally, Dr. Good works closely with our Victim Service Coordinator and Case Manager to ensure that our students have access to academic, social, and human services needed to persevere and to be successful. As you can see, Dr. Good is actually Dr. Great. Without further ado, Dr. Claire Good.
Well, what can I say after that introduction? Wow. Thank you, Dr. Oliver, very much. I want to welcome you on behalf of the Dean of Students Office to the celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. I want to remind you that Dr. King was a Baptist minister, but he was also an activist, a humanitarian, and a leader. He said we can do a lot of things together, and the focus of tonight's program is achieving the dream together. So what does achieving the dream together mean to you? One of the things that Martin Luther King Jr. said was that faith is taking the first step when you don't see the whole staircase. So I want you to think about that. Taking the first step, stepping out of your comfort zone, doing something different. He also said we must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools. I would charge each of you to learn more about those who are different from you. Look around you. Here at FAU, we have a wonderfully diverse student body. So take time to reach out to someone who doesn't look like you, who doesn't think like you, or speak like you, and learn about them. Don't just look at the color of someone's skin. Look at their culture, their spirituality, their beliefs, their opinions, their sexual identity. Find out who they are. Learn more. Expand your horizons. Discover more about your world. Martin Luther King Jr. also said, "If a man hasn't discovered something he will die for, he isn't fit to live." So tonight I want this to be the beginning of your time to discover your own something to live for. And now I'd like to introduce your hostess for this evening's program, Ms. Sethusi Dennis. Of West African descent, Sethusi is a first-generation American. She's a 21-year-old senior pursuing a dual degree in international business and communications. She is a member of the Sigma Iota chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. She is the current president of the National Panhellenic Council and event coordinator for the Black Student Union. She was crowned Miss Gold 2015 for the Upsilon Theta of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. When asked to describe herself, Sethusi states, "I am running to the money" as CEO of her very own small business, which is Afroposh, a unisex accessory line with Ankara flair. So without further ado, Ms. Dennis.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Dr. Good. How's everyone doing tonight? Good, great. Everyone a little hungry? All right. I just want to remind you all, we do have a reception immediately following this program in the Grand Palm Room, so just a little something to look forward to, but you're in for a treat tonight. Not only do we have a thought-provoking keynote speaker, we do have some wonderful talent from the best FAU students and staff. But before we get there, let's just remember why we're here for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was an activist, like earlier said, and he had a voice, and he used it. And he didn't use it in a way that was demeaning. He encouraged people to speak out, and that's why we're here, to speak on things that are going on in our world. So everyone just open your ears and keep your eyes open and be attentive. So up next, we're gonna have the singing of the national anthem by Louis Javier. He's a young Dominican man born in the Bronx, raised in Venice, Florida. He is now studying vocal performance here at FAU and aspires to sing at the professional level. After that, we'll have the singing of the Negro National Anthem performed by Miss Ashley Williams. She's a passionate individual who values building strong relationships and liberating the leaders within others. She currently serves as the Assistant Director for the Wepner Center for Lead and Service Learning. She is a proud graduate of the University of Florida, where she received her Bachelor's of Science degree, and Florida Atlantic University, where she completed her Master's in Higher Education Leadership. Ashley truly enjoys serving the students of FAU. Ashley is a member of the Golden Key International Honor Society and a member of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. So without further ado, can you all please rise for the singing of the national anthem and stay standing for the singing of the Negro National Anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallant. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Shit. I'm so sorry. Oh. I'm really nervous. Oh. And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Oh, sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us, facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won.
Let's give him one more round of applause. That was great. That was great. It's okay, Lewis. I'm sure Dr. Martin Luther King forgot to tie his shoes before a march. I'm sure he did. It's okay. It's all right. And now, we will have a performance by Ms. Fakira Gabriel. Fakira will be performing an original spoken word piece written in the spirit of Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream. Fakira is a junior majoring in communication studies, minoring in sociology from Haines City, Florida. She has a deep appreciation for MLK and courage he had to stand up for what is right. Please welcome Ms. Fakira Gabriel.
Hello. Okay. Someone once told me that Martin Luther King had a dream, and I chuckled because I had a few too. As many of us do, I wanted to see what the world would look like through the eyes of this king in the 21st century. So I pondered, wondered, and even sought after this vision until it hit me. So I compiled a list. I have a dream that my children will not fall victim at the fault of crooked cops, only wanting to use their innocent bodies as target practice, spraying bullets only to hide their hands because they know they will get off by a judge with a twitching gavel. I have a dream that one day no one will break their necks just to check when a couple of the same sex walks by, as if their love is like a plague that no one wants to catch. To see that one faithful day when the vows of matrimony could be offered to anybody without the narrow-minded disapproval of this society. I have a dream today that women will not have to look up to see opportunities, only to be restricted by the unjust glass ceiling. But that one day she will be able to shatter those barriers, receive fair wages, and finally take a seat at the equality table. I have a dream that the vision of Dr. Martin Luther King will not rest in the grave with him, but someday we will wake up from our slumber, put in an effort in order to make it a reality. I have a dream that a tomorrow will come when I can place my hand over my beating heart and recite that Pledge of Allegiance and believe it. And knowing that its words hold true power to this freedom in which it was intended, I have a dream. See, Martin Luther King had a dream that we could all join hands in sing free at last. And I have a dream that the next generation of young boys and young girls could actually be free at last. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Gabriel. That was beautiful. All right. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, ODMA, the Office of Diversity and Multicultural Affairs, invites you to visit Tunnel Vision tomorrow from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. in the majestic Palm Room of the Student Union. This experience will be followed by a candlelight vigil and march around campus starting at 6 p.m. And might I say, that Tunnel Vision, a lot of work was put into that, and it's an experience that you cannot miss out on. All of your senses walking through that tunnel and really feeling what it feels like to be oppressed, if you don't already know. Now, before I introduce tonight's speaker, we will have another selection by Mr. Luis Javier, but I do have the honor to introduce Mr. Tim Wise. Tim Wise, among the most prominent anti-racist writers and educators in the United States, named 25 visionaries who are changing your world by Utne Reader. He's the author of 7 books, including his latest, Under the Affluence, Shaming the Poor, Praising the Rich, and Sacrificing the Future of America. Tim has provided anti-racism training to teachers nationwide and has conducted trainings with physicians and medical industry professionals on how to combat racial inequities in healthcare. He has also trained corporate government, entertainment, military, and law enforcement officials on methods of dismantling racism in their institutions, and has served as consultant for plaintiffs, attorneys, in federal discrimination cases in New York and Washington State. From 1999 to 2003, he has been an advisor to the Fisk University Race Relations Institute in Nashville. And in the early 90s, he was youth coordinator and associate director of the Louisiana Coalition Against Racism and Nazism, the largest of many groups organized for the purpose of defeating neo-Nazi political candidate David Duke. He graduated from Tulane University in 1990 and received anti-racism training from the People's Institute in Survival and Beyond in New Orleans. And like I said, before he comes up, we'll have another selection by Luis Javier.
Thy hand be Linda, darkness shades me on thy bosom, let me rest. More I would, but death invades me. Death is now a welcome guest. no trouble in thy breast. When I, oh no. Remember me, forget my fate, remember me, but forget my fate.
I don't know why you would ever have a speaker follow that. I have no idea why you would do it. That was so good. I can't do that. I can't even come close to doing that. I can't. I can speak pretty good, but I can't sing. I can't do poetry like that. I know all the words to the Negro National Anthem, but I sure as hell cannot sing them like that. So this is going to be incredibly anticlimactic. I'm like one of 11 white people who knows the words to the Negro National Anthem, by the way. So you can quiz me later if you'd like. I actually know the verses that she didn't sing too, so we could go there. But don't ask me to sing them. I'm not. It's going to be awful if I do that. Thank you all so much for being here. I appreciate the efforts of everyone who made it possible for me to come for this important commemoration. All the organizers of the event. I won't name you by name. I know there were several of you. You know who you were, and if you weren't one of them, just take credit. It's all right. It's good. It's a good event. Come to the reception later. I think there's going to be food there. I'm going to sit and chat with you guys for a little bit longer, but it is great to be here. I am honored for a number of reasons, right? Number one is just the sort of general honor of being able to come and speak to you on any day, but especially honored because we're here to commemorate Dr. King and the movement of which he was a part, and then take that work forward in the 21st century, and figure out where we go from this point. And so it's a huge honor to do that, both because I was not old enough to have been a part of that movement in its actual stages that Dr. King was part of. I was, as we say in the South, 3 months in my mama's womb when he was taken from us. So being young enough not to actually recall the man we come to commemorate, it is especially an honor and a privilege to be asked to, in some ways, speak to that legacy. It's also an honor in the sense that being a white man aspiring to be a white ally in the struggle against racism and white supremacy, to be asked to speak to that legacy is an even bigger deal, and it's an even bigger burden, and it's one that I take very seriously and hope that I will discharge appropriately and dispatch in an accountable fashion. But I have to tell you that it is only at this time of year, only during this week, in fact, that I ever get nervous about any talk that I'm going to give. Not in the sense of being nervous about standing up and speaking in front of people, because I do that all the time and I've been doing it for a very long while, but nervous for this reason, really for two reasons. Number one, when something like the King holiday has been now 30 years on, first commemoration, first celebration, 1986, so here we are 30 years later. When something has been around for 30 years and it's become an American tradition, I get nervous. I get nervous that when we're talking about traditions, as so often happens, we lose the meaning because of the marketing. And we lose the significance amid the spectacle of it all. And there is a lot of marketing, and there is a lot of spectacle when it comes to this, like any other American holiday. And for me, at least, speaking on a day like this is the only time I'm ever nervous, because although I know why I came, and I know which Dr. King I've come to remember, I never really know which Dr. King other folks have come to commemorate. And here's what I mean by that. Even though there was only one Dr. King in truth and in history, we have several different Dr. Kings in memory. See? Memory and history are not the same. History is what happened. Memory is what you choose to recall and or forget. Memory plays tricks on you. And so I don't know who you're here to commemorate, and I don't much care, because I'm going to tell you which one I came for. And then you can decide whether to latch on to that one or to keep playing the games that this country would have you play, which is to remember the safer one, the sanitized one, the one that department stores use to sell things on MLK Day sales. Like Seattle, several years ago, I remember giving an MLK Day talk there, and opened up the Seattle paper that morning in my hotel, getting ready to go to the event, and I noticed that Macy's was having a MLK Day sale. I thought, well, I wonder what they're selling for MLK Day. I was like, they're selling justice at Macy's and equality at Macy's. I'm gonna run down and get me some of that and pass it out at the talk. No, they weren't selling that. Now, it was sort of funny. It was a white sale, so that's pretty funny. Think about it, right? For those of you who don't know, like, white sales means towels and sheets and stuff. It's not, real people. But I thought it was funny, a little bit ironic, and then they had, like, love seats on sale, because I'm sure Dr. King loved him a good sofa, and seemed a little bit sanitized to me, right? And that's what we do with American traditions. We make them safe. We make them go down easy like honey. We strip them of a lot of their radical content. So 30 years in, with the holiday, and nearly 50 years in since Dr. King was taken from us, it is apparent to me that it is all too easy for us as a country to water down the importance of this day, the man and the movement that we gather to celebrate, to really replace critical historical memory with platitudes and simple-minded nostalgia and happy-faced homilies and yet another acontextual reading on television of the I Have a Dream speech. You'll see that all this week, but they won't show you the whole speech. They never show you the whole speech. You probably never seen the part where Dr. King said that America had bounced a check to black folk and they were coming to get a new one because the first one was marked insufficient funds. See, they don't play that on CNN, and they don't play that on ABC, NBC, CBS, certainly not on Fox News. They don't even play that on MSNBC. They don't play that part of the talk. They only play the one line, the line, the safe, easy line that means absolutely nothing abstracted from the larger content, the one where Dr. King says that he looks forward to the day when his children will be judged based on the content of their character and not the color of their skin. Some folk apparently think that was like a one-line speech. Like Dr. King didn't speak, he tweeted out his thoughts. 140 characters, and that was it. Like, I got to make this quick. How do I do this? And he gets up, and Mahalia Jackson is behind him, and she says, tell him about the dream, Martin. And Martin says, cool. And he gives him one line, and he says, now, back to you, Mahalia. And he sits down, and she sings again. That is not what happened. This speech was far more than that line, and even that line is misunderstood. And I'll talk about that a bit more in a second. But you see, he said, and let's be clear, that America had bounced a check to black folks. We also forget that that march where that speech was given, the most famous, but not the best of his speeches by any stretch, simply the most famous one, right? That march was not a march for kumbaya. It was not a march for just simple brotherhood and getting along and holding hands and sitting at the table of brotherhood and justice. That's not what the march was called. The march was a march for jobs and freedom. And they had specific demands at that march. And judging people on the content of their character was not among the demands. The demands were jobs as a human right, housing as a human right, wages that were livable. The very same demands we continue to press today to no avail because folks weren't paying attention then, and they're not paying attention now. That's what the march was. Nobody wants to tell you that, because then we have to have a conversation about why jobs and housing, and one might add to that medical care, are not seen as human rights to which people are entitled, but instead are seen as commodities, just like your smartphone or your tablet. And if you can afford it, good. If not, too bad. That's fine. We're talking about these, I guess. This is not central to your ability to stay alive in the same way that medicine is, or a roof over your head, or food. But those are the things that Dr. King was talking about, and hardly anyone is taught that anymore. Why would they teach you that in school? Why would they teach you that? Well, they wouldn't, because we don't believe in history in this country, at least not an accurate one. Right? Documentary is too stiff. We prefer fiction. We prefer fantasy to the real thing. It's something James Baldwin warned us about back in 1965, half a century ago, in the pages of Ebony magazine. For those who haven't read Baldwin, you should do that immediately, starting tonight. Here's what Baldwin said. He more than any writer, white, black, or otherwise, in this or any other country, understood the racial drama of this nation. And he said the following about the way that we look at history and the way that white folks, in particular in America, understand or fail to understand it. He said, quote, "Those who imagine that history flatters them, as it does, indeed, since they wrote it, are impaled on their history, like a butterfly on a pin, and they become incapable of seeing or changing themselves or the world. This is where it appears to me most white Americans find themselves, impaled. They are dimly or even vividly aware that the history they have fed themselves is mainly a lie. But they do not know how to release themselves from it, and they suffer enormously from the resulting personal incoherence. See, I could sit down right now, end this speech, and let you ponder that quote for the next 24 hours, and I would have done my job. Because what Baldwin is saying is, as long as we keep lying to ourselves as a country, we can never be freed from the vagaries and the inequities of the past. See, white Americans want to be delivered from it. That's why they tell black and brown folks. That's why we tell black and brown folks to get over the past. But we don't mean it. We love the past. We are still singing a national anthem that was written a long time ago. We are still setting off fireworks on the 4th of July. And Independence Day did not come last Tuesday. We broke away from the British a real long time ago. See, we love the past when it makes us feel good. We just don't like the past when it brings us up a little short. See? When the past doesn't reflect well on us, when it doesn't make us appear as the greatest nation ever struck off by the forehead of God Almighty, then that is when we wish to forget it. But what Baldwin was saying is, until you confront it, you can't be released from it. You're trapped forever. And that's true, isn't it? Not just as a nation, that's true as individuals, and we know that, right? On the individual level, we know it. We all inherit the legacy, the drama of our families. We all inherit their dysfunctions. We inherit the good, the bad, and the ugly of the families into which we are born. And none of it's our fault, but now it is our burden. And the only way you ever get free from the dysfunction you inherit so that you don't carry it on and pass it on to your children is to face it. But as a country, we don't understand the basic gist of that. We understand it individually as a therapeutic need to sit on the couch and talk to somebody. Well, this right here, this is therapy. This is what we're doing today. And this is what we need to be doing every day as a nation, is doing the kind of therapy that allows us to move forward with intentionality and continue this work, but doing it with honesty and truth as our guideposts. So which Dr. King are we here to honor? Sadly, I know that in this country, for most people who come to honor him at this time of year, particularly for our politicians who mouth platitudes to Dr. King, from both major political parties, even while they vote for things that he would have found abhorrent. I know for them that it is not the Dr. King who said 1 year to the day before his death the following. He said that although it pained him to admit it, he had to acknowledge that the United States had become the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. Dr. King said that. You don't hear that on the nightly news either. And they don't teach you that in the history textbooks in 8th grade or even AP history in 11th grade or whatever it is that they give you that one, right? America was the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. Now, you don't have to agree with Dr. King's assessment, which he offered at the height of the Vietnam War and the height of the slaughter we were perpetuating in Southeast Asia, which ultimately killed about 4 million Southeast Asians. For what? Who knows, right? You don't have to agree with his assessment, just like you wouldn't have to agree were he still alive and still saying it today, which I dare suggest he might, were he here. But even if you decide not to agree with his assessment, what I'm trying to suggest to you is that as a nation, we don't have the right to act like he didn't say it. You can disagree. You don't have to glom on to Dr. King. You don't have to love him. He's a secular saint, but you don't have to worship him. You can walk away from him. But see, as a nation, we've turned him into a secular saint. Everybody wants a piece of him, and some folks can't have one. That's what I'm trying to say to you. Because if you're going to vote weapons of war and vote for militarism and vote for wars that Dr. King would have found abhorrent and then go to church on Sunday and say that you're acting in the tradition of Dr. King, see, there's something wrong. You ought not even set foot in a church or an MLK Day celebration if you support those priorities. And far too many of our lawmakers and our citizens do. But maybe that's unkind and unfair of me, because after all, church is for sinners. So maybe that's exactly who needs to be in the church, right? The folks who violate Dr. King's vision every day and do it with plans and policies that he would have found morally abhorrent. But now here's the trick about sinners. See, I don't know a lot about, I'm no biblical scholar, and I don't know much about Jesus, except that I'm Jewish and so is he. That's all I know. Like, he's one of ours. That's all I know about Jesus, really. But I also know he had a very funny way of dealing with sinners, right? When he would come upon sinners, at least twice in the Bible, if not 3 times, he says what to them? He says, go and sin no more, you see. So it's fine if you're going to do things that violate not only the God and the gospel that you claim to follow, but also Dr. King as a secular saint. It's all right if you do that, but what Dr. King would want you to remember, and what I'm assuming Jesus would, was it's okay to sin once, maybe even twice, but at some point you have to go and sin no more. So if you keep on doing it year after year, even as you claim to be in the tradition of Dr. King, then there's something wrong with you. And that goes for members of both parties, see? It isn't just folks on the right who violate the vision of Dr. King. We've dropped 23,000 bombs on Muslim countries in the last 12 months under a Democratic administration led by a man of color. Trust me when I tell you that Dr. King would have called that out too, because he didn't care about Democrat or Republican. He didn't call about white leader or black leader. His goal was not to have a black president. That was not in the I Have a Dream speech. That was no part of his vision. He never talked about it. He talked about the triple evils of America, and no president, this one included, no party, Democrats included, have actually committed to eradicating them. What did he say they were? Militarism, poverty, and racism. Neither party wants to talk about militarism, at least not on our part. Some want to carpet bomb people. Some want to extend militarism, very much in violation of Dr. King's vision. Racism we don't talk about very much, except to say that it doesn't exist anymore. And this we know because we have a black president, so that proves it. Very much like I'm sure it proved there was no more sexism in Great Britain when Margaret Thatcher became the head of state there. No more patriarchy or sexism in Pakistan when Benazir Bhutto became the head of state there. Not once, but twice. She has since been assassinated. So it lets you know how some folks felt about her and her leadership. No one would say that sexism had been eradicated in Great Britain or in India or Pakistan or Israel or any other place, the Philippines, Ireland, all of which have had female heads of state. But we say that in this country about race just because a man of color has ascended to the top of the political system. So we don't have politicians really want to talk about racism to any real extent. And we certainly don't talk about eradicating poverty. Politicians don't speak of poverty at all. They bash poor people. That's different. Right? They don't talk about eradicating poverty. Check the next time any person seeking your vote for office wants to talk about economics and who they're out to help, and they all say, both parties say, I'm the champion of the what? Middle class. They don't talk about poverty and poor folks. They're off the radar entirely unless we're judging them. They talk about the middle class. What is that? That's a nice, safe term, right? Because everybody thinks they're middle class. So if I say I'm the champion of the middle class, you think I'm talking about you. But here's the problem. People define themselves, they've done studies on this, right? Folks that make 20 grand a year, they call themselves middle class. People that make $200,000 a year, they call themselves middle class. Here's a pro tip. If next year you make 20 grand and the year after that you make 200 grand, notice you are not living the same in the course of that 2-year period. Like, things will be different for you from one year to the next, but we act as if it's all one big, happy, classless, equal society, because that's easier than dealing with what Dr. King actually said. And once again, you don't have to agree with him about the triple evils. You don't have to agree when he says that America is the greatest purveyor of violence, but you have to deal with the fact that he said it. You don't get to pick and choose what parts of Dr. King you're going to take and which parts you're going to leave. Oh, I like the content of character part and the can't we all get along part, but I don't like all the rest, because without all the rest, there is no Dr. King, right? There are a lot of ways to kill a person, I suppose, right? You can kill them with bullets, bombs, or simply distorting that person's message to such an extent that they become unrecognizable to themselves, and we've done that. And if you don't believe that we've done it, ask children what they know about Dr. King. I have a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old, and over the years as they've grown up, I've gotten into the habit of asking their classmates or people at their age, when I would meet them around the country, speaking sometimes to middle schools even, I'd say, tell me what you know about Dr. King. What do you think Dr. King would say if he were here today? Because I'm just curious what they know, both about him and about the society in which they live today, right? Because I don't think you're ever too young to be told the truth. See, I just have this funny way of believing that truth is good for all living things and that lies distort the growth and development of living things. So I don't believe in pulling too many punches. Yeah, there are age-appropriate ways to talk about harsh subjects, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about them. Sadly, when I ask young people what they know about Dr. King and what they think he would say, you know what they tell me almost inevitably? Doesn't matter if they're black, white, Latino, Asian, indigenous to this continent, doesn't matter. They all have roughly the same answer when they're children. They say, well, I think he would say don't fight, don't hit, don't pick up a gun, don't join a gang. Yeah, you think? Yeah, he probably would. I think Dr. King probably would say don't join a gang, don't hit, don't fight, don't pick up a gun. That's safe. That's probably accurate. But here's what I know about Dr. King. That isn't the sum total of what the man said, because if that was, he wouldn't have a national holiday. How do I know that? We don't give national holidays to people who simply say don't hit and don't join a gang and don't pick up a gun. I know that because if that were all it took to get a national holiday, my mama would have had a national holiday by 1973, because she told me that when I was a child. And there is no Lucinda Wise holiday. You ain't never heard of Lucinda Wise. Don't know who that is. There's no holiday for her. She said don't fight, don't hit, don't pick up a gun, don't join a gang, nothing. Didn't honor her, nobody's heard of her, right? That's not what Dr. King did that made him special and great and worthy of our remembrance here today. But that's what we tell children. See, we tell them that it's just about not being interpersonally violent. So if someone's bothering you, don't hit them, and you fulfilled the dream. That has nothing at all to do with it, because nonviolence in Dr. King's world was in the service of a particular cause. It wasn't some abstract concept, right? It wasn't just nonviolence for the sake of nonviolence. It was nonviolent, first of all, nonviolent civil disobedience. We forget the civil disobedience part, right? When you take that out, now it's not even the real thing anymore. Now it's just not hitting people. That's not why folks died, just so other people wouldn't hit. Nonviolent civil disobedience, for what purpose? The eradication of racism and white supremacy, that's what. But those young children don't know about that because we don't teach them that, because we want to keep them innocent, you see. They're not going to be innocent for long. That innocence is going to get snatched by a system that doesn't tell them the truth and by a society that feeds them lies. Why don't we just tell the truth from the beginning so that these young people can understand that nonviolence is in the purpose, has a purpose beyond itself, and that purpose is justice. That's what Dr. King said. It was not an abstract notion. And let's also remember that Dr. King defined violence very broadly, too. He didn't look at violence just as me hitting you and you hitting me back, or picking up a gun or joining a gang or shooting somebody. He looked at violence as a systemic thing. Right? So it wasn't just interpersonal. Poverty was violence. War was violence. Racism was violence. Discrimination was violence. See, when folks throw a brick through a CVS in downtown Baltimore, everybody calls that violence. But when the federal and state governments, beginning in the 1950s, plowed the interstate through black communities in Baltimore and knocked down 20% of black housing in that city, so as to spur progress, so that white folks could leave the city and move to the suburbs where only we could live. And so white folks could then come back into the city and work in the places where only we could work. We didn't call that violence. You can destroy black and brown housing in this country through what they called urban renewal, which meant black and brown folk removal. And that's not violence, but you throw a brick through a CVS to protest injustice at the hands of police, and all of a sudden you're the violent one. When Johns Hopkins University subjected poor black children and families in Baltimore to lead poisoning on purpose in the 90s, you didn't hear about that either, because that didn't make the news. But in the 1990s, Johns Hopkins University, the Kennedy Krieger Institute, using federal money, your tax dollars, actually did a study where they were taking poor, mostly black families and putting them in lead-infested apartments just to test the effect of lead on the blood of children. We already know the effect of lead on the blood of children. We got 50 years of research at least on that, but they wanted to do another study. So they took families and bribed them with $5, $50, a couple t-shirts, $10 off rent, and put them in these facilities and then gauge their level of lead poisoning. And many of those children ended up with lead poisoning levels 3 to 4 times the acceptable level according to the CDC and the National Institutes of Health. That was done with your tax dollars. We don't call that violence. We call that science. See? But if somebody throws a brick through the Kennedy Krieger Institute and burns Johns Hopkins to the ground tomorrow, they're going to go to jail. Know that. See, because when you have power, you can do violence. It doesn't even get called violence, and you don't go to prison. Steal $10 worth of SNAP benefits, what we used to call food stamps, you'll go away for 20 years. Steal $12.5 trillion of other people's money on Wall Street, you'll get a bonus, and you'll keep your job. That is the America in which we live. Why don't we tell children the truth? Dr. King would want us to talk about that. So who are we here to celebrate and follow? The apostle of colorblindness, or the radical prophet of racial equality? Because contrary to popular perception, Dr. King didn't believe in colorblindness, let alone preach it. Dr. King didn't believe that we shouldn't pay attention to color, that we shouldn't notice color, that we shouldn't acknowledge color, or that we shouldn't think about its meaning. He didn't say that. That's not what that line about the content of character meant. How do we know that? Very simply, because if you read his writings, Or if you listen to the other speeches, or even listen to the rest of that speech, like, how could a colorblind prophet say that America had bounced a check to black folk? If he said black folk or black people, he clearly could see color. He didn't say, like, America bounced a check to some indeterminate group of people whose race and ethnicity I cannot discern. He didn't say that. He said black people. He knew who was up and who was down, and more to the point, he knew why. And he said why. He said very specifically in the early 60s that white folks had betrayed our ethical professions and protestations of democracy. In the letter from the Birmingham jail in 63, he called out white ministers specifically and white moderates. That was the phrase he used. And what did he say about white moderates? He said that white moderates were a bigger impediment to justice than the Ku Klux Klan and the most rabid of segregationists. Why? Because they were more committed to order than justice. Now, what does that sound like? See, to me, that sounds an awful lot like some folks today who are a lot more concerned with maintaining order in the nation's cities than with addressing the police misconduct, brutality, and violence that has sent so many thousands of people into the street to demand something better, right? A lot of folks will lecture those who protest using the same terminology, concepts, and criticisms that were used in Dr. King's day. They want order over justice. Dr. King spoke to those people, and he told them they were wrong, and he said why, see? So he wasn't an apostle of colorblindness. In 1968, in a speech just a few weeks before he died, you can see it on YouTube. It was only recently unearthed. I'd never even seen this speech or heard of it. It's old video footage, and I put it on my website about a year and a half ago. You can probably search for it on timwise.org if you want to watch it. It's a brilliant speech. And in it, just a few weeks before the Poor People's Campaign was set to kick off in D.C., he gave this talk. And in this talk, he noted that this government had created dozens of programs over the previous roughly 1 century at least, specifically to empower white Americans, but from which black Americans and other peoples of color had been excluded. Things like the Homestead Act, created in 1862, which gave 240 million acres of virtually free land to white folks, but nobody who wasn't white. The FHA loans, the VA loans for homes, the GI Bill, which put hundreds of billions of dollars of housing, equity, and educational opportunity in the hands of white folks, often and usually not available to people of color. And what he said in that speech was that it was necessary for African Americans to come and demand their piece of the national pie. That's not what a colorblind prophet says. Colorblind prophet doesn't even notice who's up and who's down. He did. He understood the wisdom of Julian Bond, one of his contemporaries, another civil rights legend who we lost this last year, sadly, who said what? That to be blind to color is to be blind to the consequences of color, and especially the consequences of being the wrong color in America, see? If you're blind to color, you're blind to its consequences, and if it continues to have consequences, how are you going to fix them? You cannot confront, let alone fix a problem that you will not look at dead in the face. So which Dr. King are we here to remember? The de-radicalized supporter of community service or the soldier for social transformation? Now let me explain what I mean by this. I know that at this time of year, and I know that on Monday y'all did the day of service, and there is nothing wrong with that. It's good stuff, and we ought to do it not just on one day or a couple days, we ought to do it all the time. But I just want to suggest to you that we have a problem as a country when we take Dr. King's call for service and stretch it so much that its radical content is lost. So we have a national organization dedicated to like organizing community service projects all around the country, and churches tap into it, and schools tap into it, colleges tap into it, and that's wonderful. But they've taken this one quote you've probably seen from Dr. King, like, everyone can be great because anyone can serve. What does that mean? That is an abstract, vapid statement. That's so prosaic, it's like beneath the dignity of most of this man's prose. Well, you know what? There's actually more to it than that. You should read the larger context of what he was talking about, because the way he makes it sound, it's like, just go do something for somebody and you're doing the work, right? There's that other quote they use, which is, the most important question in life is, what are you doing for others? What? Like, anyone in this room could have come up with that. Like, that's not really all that deep. Like, do something for others. Okay, now I got a holiday. No, that's not how that works. He didn't believe in abstract service. There was a specific purpose. But I go on that website of the national organization, whatever it's called, the one that organizes all the stuff at the federal level, and they say things, over the years I've seen, they'll say, well, today on Dr. King Day for service, you could go give blood to the Red Cross. All right, do that. But do we actually think that's the work? Giving blood at the Red, do we think Dr. King died so that we'd have enough O positive at the Red Cross? in case there was a national disaster. I'm not saying don't donate blood, but good Lord, how far away from the work of the movement and the struggle are we going to get and act like we're still in the movement? Give blood, go paint a fence in a poor neighborhood, right? Sure, do that. Go build a house with Habitat for Humanity. Do that. That's fabulous. But unless you're also asking why it is that in the richest nation in the history of the cosmos, we still have folks that don't have housing, right? If you're going and feeding the poor as a community service and not asking how it is that the richest nation in the history of the cosmos has people that don't have enough to eat, if you're going and reading to children who can't read and they're 9 or 10 years old, and you're not asking how it is that in the wealthiest nation on earth we have people still suffering from illiteracy by the 4th and 5th grade, then you're not doing the work. See, service has to come with the question, because unless you're asking how it is that we continue to live in a society that produces the need for your charity, you're not doing the work. Dr. King wasn't about charity. He was very clear. In fact, he said private charity is no substitute for public justice. His words, not mine. His words. Private charity's fine, but it's no substitute for public justice. If we had public justice, we would need as much private charity, and you wouldn't have to do as much community service, because folks would have been served from the beginning. And they would have had justice from the beginning. They wouldn't need the droppings from your tables, right? So that's what we have to get back to. And you don't have to agree, but you can't act like Dr. King didn't say it. And yet as a country, that's exactly what we do. We've privatized pain. We've privatized our response to it. And that's not acceptable, at least not in the image and the vision of Dr. King. So what would he tell us if he were here today? Well, we can only speculate, but I think it's safe to say, looking at his readings, his writings, his speeches, he would certainly stand up and condemn the nation's growing inequalities of income and wealth. He would challenge us to ask whether it's really justifiable from a moral or practical perspective that the wealthiest 0.1% of Americans owns the same amount of assets as the bottom 90% combined. That's 320,000 people. The wealthiest 0.1% have the same amount of stuff as the bottom 290 million people. 320,000, 290 million, and they own the same amount of assets. He would want us to ask whether that was really because these folks were just that much smarter. And we'd need to dig a little deeper. He'd want to know whether it was really justifiable that the wealthiest 30 people in this country, just the wealthiest 30, have the same amount of wealth as the nation's poorest half, which is 160 million. 30 people over here, 160 million people over here. Do we really think that there are 30 people who have worked that much harder than 160 million people? 30 people who, by virtue of their genius, their IQ, their huge, big brains, have somehow earned all that stuff so that they have as much as the poorest 160 million? Those are important questions we better start asking. We better ask whether we think it's moral for the 6 heirs to the Walmart fortune, the Walton family, 5 of whom were born into it, 1 of whom married in. They have so much wealth, just between the 6 of them, they have the same amount of wealth and assets as the bottom 40% of Americans, 130 million people on this side, 6 people on this side. Do we think the Walton family's just that genius, that smart? Well, they are pretty smart enough to pay their employees sub-poverty living wages so they can't survive and support a family, and then those employees, what do they have to do? They have to actually turn to food stamps to subsidize their inadequate wages. That's pretty brilliant, I suppose, in a way. Pay folks not enough to live, then they have to turn to the taxpayers to fill in the gap. Think about that. Walmart's the nation's biggest employer, one of the wealthiest companies in the history of companies, right? And yet they have people working for them who have to get you as taxpayers to pick up the slack because they don't pay enough in wages. Now here's the real kicker. When those folks get their food stamp benefits, where do you think they redeem them for food? At Walmart. $13.5 billion a year that is earned by Walmart from food stamp redemption on the part of Walmart employees alone. $13.5 billion with a B dollars. So they get money on both ends. They short their workers on the front end, then they get their money on the back end, or actually our money as taxpayers that only had to be given to the workers because they weren't making enough money. That's how these folks got all that dough. The Walton family has enough money, by the way. Those 6 people have so much money they could buy every house in Dallas, every condo in Dallas, every townhome in Dallas, or every house, every condo, every townhome in Miami, or every house, every condo, every townhome in Seattle, and still have $40 billion left, with which they could buy up all the property in Napa if they like wine, or Anaheim if their kids like to go to Disney. And they still have $4 billion left. Just to put that in perspective, folks think Oprah's real rich. That's what folks always say. We talk about, well, what about Oprah? She's rich. Oprah's not that kind of rich. Oprah has enough money that if she wanted to, she could buy up all the houses in Mokina, Illinois, wherever the hell that is. I don't even know where Mokina, she's Mokina rich. She's not Walton rich, right? 6 people, the same as 130 million people. I'm pretty sure Dr. King would ask us about that and ask us what it means about a country that we allow such vast disparities and inequities, and whether it's really moral, whether it's really based on merit. He would want us to confront the ongoing reality of racial inequality. Right now, the wealthiest 400 white people in this country have the same amount of assets as all 41 million black folks combined. Let me repeat, 400 white people, the wealthiest 400 white Americans, have the same assets, the same wealth as every black person in this country, including Oprah, put together. Do we really think there are 400 white people that have worked that much harder than all black folks? Keeping in mind before you answer, of course, that were it not for the labor of black folks, there wouldn't be a country. Right? No country, because the revolution was financed on the back of industries that were dependent on black labor. The levees that kept the river from flooding the plantations owned by white people were built by black people under duress in slave labor camps that we call plantations and take tours through, where we don't learn about the slave labor, we learn about the parties and the cotillions and the big hoop skirts and the parasols and the carriage rides. Right? It'd be like setting up a carnival in Dachau and calling that history. Right? We don't like that comparison, but it's an accurate one. Right? That's what Dr. King would want us to talk about, the fact that that level of racial inequality exists today, half a century almost after his death. Black folks with college degrees twice as likely as white folks with degrees to be unemployed today. Latinos with degrees, 50% more likely than white folks with degrees to be unemployed today. Asian American and Pacific Islanders, 25% more likely than white folks to be unemployed even when both have a degree. Our indigenous brothers and sisters, 2/3 more likely than white folks to be unemployed even when both have a degree. See? And yet we still have people running around saying, white folks saying, we can't get a job because reverse discrimination, all the good jobs are going to black people. Where are these jobs that black people and Mexican folk are taking from white people? Are these jobs in Second Life? Where are these jobs? Are these jobs on Minecraft? Where are these jobs? Like, they're not in the real world. The Labor Department data is clear, but people keep saying it. You know, and then it's funny, right? Because the same people that say black and brown folks take all the jobs are the same people that say black and brown folks are lazy. All right, which is it? See, which is it? Because it can't be both. You sort of got to pick a prejudice. Like, they're both wrong, but just pick one. I don't ask much from racists because I expect even less, but just consistency. I just don't like a moving target. Like, if you're going to say something stupid, just choose one stupid thing for the day. If you took all the jobs, you're by definition not lazy. And if you're lazy, you didn't even take one job, let alone all the jobs, so just pick one. See, this is the kind of illogic that comes with racism and white supremacy, both attitudinally and institutionally. Dr. King would want us to challenge that. He would want us to ask why it is that white households that are headed by someone who dropped out of high school have twice the net worth of black households headed by somebody with a college degree. Let me repeat, the typical median, sort of right mid-range net worth for white households with a high school dropout as the head, $52,000 a year, $52,000 in assets. Not a lot, but you know, $52,000, right? And usually that's value of the home, equity in the home, that kind of thing, right? But black households headed by somebody with a college degree, so they have more education, more quote-unquote qualifications. You would think that maybe that would put them in a better position, certainly relative to a white dropout household, and yet black households headed by college grads, median net worth $26,000, half as much. That's today. It's not 30 years ago, not 50 years ago, not 100 years ago. That is now. But very few of our politicians and very little of our media will acknowledge it. Dr. King would certainly be clear were he here. He would affirm the simple truth that Black lives matter and that any nation that isn't prepared to proclaim that loudly and proudly, and any law enforcement official who isn't clear on it deserves to be reminded every day by unceasing and unyielding protest until they get the message. As long as young black men are 21 times more likely than young white men to be killed by law enforcement, 2 to 3 times more likely even when unarmed and posing no immediate risk at all, black lives do not, in fact, in this country matter, at least not at the level of officialdom, so we have to proclaim it because some folks don't get it. As long as a 12-year-old like Tamir Rice can be shot dead in a park in Cleveland and nobody go to jail or even get indicted for it, even though he lies, this law enforcement officer who has not and will not apparently be indicted said he gave Tamir Rice 3 warnings upon pulling up. And then Tamir Rice pulled his gun from his waistband, turned out to be a toy gun, of course, and ostensibly pointed it at the officer, and he had no choice but to shoot. That was the original version of the story. Of course, there was a video camera rolling, and the officer didn't know it. You didn't see the car actually pull up. He had a second and a half between the time the car stops and Tamir drops, and he didn't even get out of the car before the shots were fired. He didn't give 1 warning, let alone 2 warnings, let alone 3 warnings. So he lies about it, but he gets away with it because black lives institutionally apparently do not matter. That is why we have to proclaim it, because all Tamir Rice was doing is something white boys do every day in this country, play with toy guns. Hell, white boys play with real guns. White folks walk around in the streets of this country in open carry states like Ohio, which is where Tamir Rice died, carrying semi-automatic weapons and assault rifles and don't get shot. You can take over federal property in Oregon with guns and say that you are ready to die and they will not drop bombs on you. But if you launch a protest in occupied territory against the will of the government in the city of Philadelphia and you're black like the folks in MOVE did in 1985, they will burn the block to the ground. See? That is what Dr. King would want us to think about, because if we don't say Black Lives Matter, we default to a system where they apparently don't. And no, he wouldn't get suckered by these folks that run around pushing back on Black Lives Matter and say, well, Dr. King would say all lives matter. No, he wouldn't. I mean, he would, but not in that context. He knew that all lives matter. I know they all do, Precious. Don't get twisted about that. I know. Of course all lives matter, and black lives don't matter more than any others, but see, the point is, when you forgot some people, you have to proclaim them specifically. This country has always said all and not meant it. We said all men are created equal. That was a lie. We didn't mean it. So you can say all, and then black and brown folks know that they weren't really included in that, so why would they assume you mean that they're included now? See? To say all lives matter, it'd be like going back, like some of you are old enough to remember in the 70s, the big phrase was black is beautiful, right? That was the big phrase because the beauty standards of the country and the fashion industry and everything else had been geared toward white folks, right? And so black is beautiful became the way for black folk to take back the beauty standard, and it would be like going back in a time machine to like 1971 when that was the thing, and getting out of your time machine and hearing somebody say black is beautiful and then responding by saying, well, we're all beautiful in our own way. Yeah, shut up. That's not the point. Yeah, we know. We get that. It'd be like going back to the early 80s when the HIV/AIDS crisis touched off, and you had folks out in the streets, ACT UP, gay men's health crisis, out in the streets doing what? Demanding funding for AIDS research, because President Reagan didn't even utter the word, right, for the first 4 years or so until his buddy Rock Hudson died, right? And then all of a sudden he got up the courage to mention it, still not really fund much research for it. But so there were folks out there demanding funding, and basically what was the subtext? They were saying people with AIDS lives matter. That was really the message, even though they didn't use that phrase. That was the message. So to say all lives matter in response to Black Lives Matter would be like interrupting one of those rallies where they're saying people with AIDS lives matters with a sign that says, what about pancreatic cancer? What about that? Yeah, we get it. People die of lots of stuff, sort of not the point right now. You have to proclaim that which has been ignored specifically so it won't be anymore. Dr. King would be standing at the border, but not for the reason some folks are, to block those seeking opportunity. He wouldn't be there for that purpose. And let's be clear, just that one border, because we only worry about the one, don't we? We don't sweat the Canadian border. The Minutemen don't stand out on the American side, U.S. side of the Canadian border with guns, trying to shoot crafty Canadians coming over to take advantage of our superior healthcare system. They don't shoot at people in boats off Nova Scotia coming in to take advantage of our superior healthcare system. It's just the Mexican border, which, by the way, you should know, historically is an artificial border created because of a war of aggression that this country started on false pretense, which is to say Mexican folk, they're sort of coming home. Right? Their families were on this land a long time before most all of us were. Right? So what we've done is we've put them out of the house, changed the lock, said they can't come back, and call that justice. We got fools running around saying they're going to build a wall, but not just any wall. No. A wall like you wouldn't believe. A big, beautiful wall like you wouldn't believe. What is a wall that I wouldn't believe? What the hell is that? If there are any translators in the room, Tell me what is a wall that, like the only wall that I wouldn't believe is like a wall made of butter. Is that what he means? Like a big, beautiful butter wall? Because if it's about butter, I don't think that's going to work, actually. I don't believe it. I think it'll melt, right? But anything else, I would probably believe, except the part where he says, who builds walls better than Trump? I don't know. Anybody? Trump has never built a wall in his life. He builds casinos and office buildings and hotels. And let's be honest, Donald Trump doesn't actually build anything. You know what? He gets brown people to do that, and many of them are undocumented, just so we're clear on that. Dr. King would want us to point that out. He'd be standing at the border, but not to block people. He would want to remind Americans, particularly those of us called white, that we lie to ourselves when we separate our immigrant ancestors from those coming from Mexico or Guatemala or Honduras or Sri Lanka or anywhere on the continent of Africa or anywhere else. We want to separate ourselves, don't we? We tell ourselves all these fictions. That's what we've done. It's what Baldwin was talking about in that quote from Ebony magazine, right? So white Americans believe that our ancestors are different than those people. Oh, well, our people came for freedom, liberty, democracy, justice. We came for principles. Those people, they're just coming for stuff. What? We didn't come for freedom and liberty. And I know that because if we had come for that, we might have established freedom and liberty. But we didn't. You think the colonial period was a great time in human democracy and liberty? Are you kidding? White folks, putting aside what white colonists were doing to black and brown folks, to indigenous people, it's what we were doing to each other. Like white colonists were spending most of their time trying to figure out who was the witch, right? Like going around burning women, hanging them from trees, drowning them in streams, saying that you're not a real Christian. No, you're not a real Christian. No, you're not a real Christian. No, you're possessed by the devil. I mean, this was not a great moment for human freedom and liberty. But we act like our colonial forefathers, my goodness, they came for the right reasons. These people just come to take advantage. But our people came to take advantage of land that we didn't care was at that time being lived on by other people. We came for opportunity that we felt was being denied in our countries of origin. And by the way, there's no shame in that. It's actually an act of resistance. There's something quite wonderful about that. When you can't make it in place A, you get up and you go to place B. That's what people have done all throughout human history. And nobody does it for fun, but we act like Mexican folk are just, conniving and planning and scheming to come and take, but they're coming for the same reason. We didn't come for principle, we came for stuff, opportunity, the ability to live. It's not as if sometime in the mid-1600s, some British family woke up one morning and the father gathered his kids around and his wife around and said, all right now, listen up. Daddy has a plan, and I want to share it with you, and I think you're going to think it's brilliant. Watch this. So I know we're doing really well here. Like we got this big mansion, all this gold out back, right? Remember last week children went to the king's palace? You remember that? You played with his children out in the backyard in the garden. Wasn't that great? Wasn't that brilliant? It was great, right? It was fabulous. Okay, good. I know you like that, and I know you'd like to go back, but I've got a wild idea. And I think we should try it out. I think that maybe like next week, just gather your things, just like whatever you can carry, and we are going to get on a boat, a really big, rickety ship. It might not even be seaworthy, I don't know. Like it might sink. We might get eaten by sharks. Like we might get scurvy, some awful disease, die a horrible death, never be heard from again. However, if we survive, it will be a wonderful adventure. Okay, that did not happen. The winners didn't get on the boat. The European immigrants who came here were the losers of our respective societies. Let's just tell the truth. See, because Donald Trump can say, well, the Mexicans are not sending their best. You think Europe sent their best? Who do you think was on those ships? I tell you who wasn't. The king wasn't on them. Nobody the king liked was on them. Right? The winners didn't leave. The winners stayed put. The losers got on the boat. There's no difference. But when we try to tell lies to ourselves to make ourselves feel better and our history feel better, we end up separating ourselves. We can't see ourselves in them, and we can't see them in us. And that's what creates all this drama. Dr. King would want us to see ourselves in the other, and one of the ways we can do that is by stopping the lies about how we came to this place and for what purpose. As long as we continue to tell those lies, we'll get nowhere. So what do we have to do? A couple of things that I think are important, and then I'll be done. I think if we're really going to move forward with the vision and the intentionality of Dr. King and the movement of which he was a part, we're going to have to do a couple of things very, very clearly. Number one, we're going to have to accept that we're all implicated in this. Every single one of us. Not because we're guilty of having created all the inequality. No one in this room is guilty of having created it. You're not to blame, right?
But there's a difference between guilt and responsibility. Yes? No one is innocent, but the opposite of innocence in this sense is not guilt. It's responsible or accountable, right? Guilt is what you feel for the stuff that you've actually done. Responsibility is what you take because of the kind of person that you are. And we take responsibility for things all the time that we didn't strictly speaking cause, right? It's not that weird a concept. Like, I don't think any of you in this room personally, like, took your own vat of toxic waste and dumped it in the ocean or spit it through a smokestack into the air and polluted the ecology of our planet. But that stuff has been done, has it not? And as a result, we as responsible, not only citizens of this country, but citizens of the world, recognize that we have certain obligations, yes, to do things about the environmental and ecological destruction that our industrial processes have wrought. So even though you're not to blame for it, you got to take responsibility for it, because those two things are not the same. Same is true with racial inequality. All those things I mentioned before, both the economic disparities in general and the racial disparities in particular, those are not your fault, but you're born into a society that hasn't treated those things sufficiently and hasn't taken them seriously enough. And so we now have to do that because we're all on the hook. We have all inherited this troubled legacy and we can't run from it any longer. Secondly, we have to reject the denial that is so prevalent among many. The denial that says it's not really a problem. See, here's the thing about being a member of a dominant group, and everyone in here is a member of at least one, I guarantee you, right? It's not just white folks. It's men as men, it's straight and cisgendered folk as straight and cisgendered folk, it's able-bodied people relative to persons with disabilities, it's people with money relative to everybody else. It's just being in college, right, puts you in dominant position relative to 99.999% of the world's population. So we all have some forms of privilege. Some of us have got more than others, but we all have some. I've never met anybody whose identities were all marginalized or all oppressed. Usually we're a combination, right? And when you're a member of a dominant group, whatever category you're dominant in is the one that you get to be completely oblivious to, right? And so we have to pierce the veil of that obliviousness, right? Because you don't have to learn about things when you're not the target of the system of oppression. You get the luxury, the privilege of being stone cold ignorant to other people's truth. So for those of us who are white, we don't have to know, right? When you don't have to know, you generally don't. Like, I'm oblivious to calculus. Why? Because I didn't take it. Why? Because they didn't make me. And if they weren't going to make me, I definitely was not going to take it, right? But by not taking it, if I were to stand up here and try to do it, y'all would know immediately. You'd be like, hey, wait a minute, that is not right. I don't think he knows how to do calculus. And wait a minute, didn't he just say he never took the class? Aha. It's exactly what I said. Here's the point. In this country, sometimes we white folks think we know more about racism than people of color, and we didn't take the class. When it comes to sexism or patriarchy or rape culture, men think that we know more about it than women, and we did not take the class because we didn't have to. Those of us who are straight or cisgender think that we know more about straight supremacy, homophobia, transphobia than people who actually live with it in the LGBTQ community, and we never had to take the class. People with money act like we know more about poor people and their culture of poverty, as we like to call it, than actual poor people do, and that we know how to fix them better than they know how to fix themselves. I remember I used to work in public housing in New Orleans as a community organizer, and I would tell people that that's what I did, and then when I would tell people that that's what I did, they would always say things like, well, you know what those people need. Because folks will always offer you unsolicited advice about people they've never met, but about whom they've been taught to judge. They said, what those people, we need to send millionaires, corporate executives into public housing projects and teach those poor people how to manage money. You think? I don't. How hard is it to manage money when you're a millionaire? Give me a couple million, I'll manage. Doesn't take any skill. In fact, if you have enough money, you don't even manage your own money. You hire somebody to do that for you. That's not talent, that's just power. You know what does take skill? Figuring out how to keep your family alive on $327 a month, which is what those women that I worked with were able to do every single month, month in and month out, year in and year out, and not die. That takes talent. Maybe we ought to send poor women and poor children and poor families out into rich neighborhoods and tell rich folks how to live on less. Maybe that is the skill that we ought to actually facilitate. But rich people think they know more because we get to be oblivious if you have money. Not even rich, just upper middle class. You get to be oblivious. If you're able-bodied, you get to be oblivious to ableism. You have to think about the stuff that folks with disabilities have to think about every day, how they're going to get into a room, out of a room, what it's going to be like at work. Is the workspace going to be, is going to accommodate their particular disability, whether it's a visible or an invisible one, because there are obviously many of both. You have the luxury of obliviousness. And if you're able-bodied, that doesn't make you a bad person, right? It has nothing to do with your goodness or badness. It's not about like, oh my God, I'm an ableist. Well, you are by default, but you don't wake up every morning thinking, how can I make this university, how can I make this world as unaccommodating as possible to the disabled? Very few people wake up with that mentality. Just like very few people wake up with the mentality of, how can I make the world as unaccommodating as possible for this group or that group or this group or that group? Most people are good people. But the problem is, if you haven't been required to know something about something, you're not going to know it. And then you're likely to fall into a pattern that perpetuates that problem. That obliviousness is like, you ever see the movie The Matrix, right? Where Lawrence Fishburne's character offers Keanu Reeves' character 2 pills, one is blue, one is black. He says, you can choose. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up, you don't know what's going on. You'd be just like everybody else in this society. Nobody wants to know the truth. They'd rather die than know the truth. Or you can take the red pill, and I can show you enlightenment. I can take you down the rabbit hole and show you how deep it goes, and you can start to see what's really happening in this society. So he takes the red pill, and if you've seen the movie, you know he starts to see all these things going on in the background that he never saw before. That's like a perfect metaphor for race and identity, right? Because when you're white in a society dominated by white supremacy, you have the luxury of walking around with a blue pill IV drip in your arm from the time that you pop out of your mama's womb and not even know it's there. You don't have to know anything about it because you got the black and brown folks are like, don't you see this racism? And we're like, no, blue pill. I don't know what you're talking about. Bleh, I got the blue pill, right? Women say, don't you see the sexism in men because we don't have to think about it? Like, no, blue pill. And I know that like men and blue pill mean some different stuff in the modern pharmaceutical era. It's a Pfizer joke. I find it interesting that you laughed. It shows that marketing works, right? But men have the luxury of being on that blue pill when it comes to sexism, patriarchy, rape culture. Those of us who are straight or cisgendered, same thing. Able-bodied, same thing. Moneyed, same thing. When you're a member of a dominant group, you just don't know what other folks have to know because they have to know it to survive. So what does that really mean, and what does it mean for us today? It means that part of getting this right and moving forward is learning to listen. White folks learning to listen to the wisdom of people of color. I'm glad to come and give this talk. I'm glad to give talks all around the country. I'm glad that folks buy my books and read my articles and listen to the things I have to say. But unless we're prepared to start hearing this truth from black and brown faces just as quickly as we hear it from mine, we are doomed as a country. I'm telling you that much. The third thing we have to do is learn from movement history. See, around this time of year, we get all these retrospectives of the movement, and they make it seem so easy. Right? Because all they want to do is show you the victories, because those are the uplifting. That's how we do history. We only talk about the good stuff. We don't talk about the setbacks. So now you ask people about the movement, they think it was this simple, like constant linear process of progress, right? So it's like, oh, there was a bus boycott and they won. And then there was a sit-in and they won. And then there was a march and they won. And then there was a I Have a Dream speech and everybody was like, oh my God, that's brilliant. And they won. And then there was another march and they got beat a little bit, but they still won. And then everything was fine. Right? But actually, all across that movement, there were setbacks, there were defeats, there were campaigns you never heard about because they didn't end well. Right? There were 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 steps forward, 5 steps back, 7 steps forward, 2 steps back. It was a constant give and take. And if you don't know that, it gets easy to get discouraged in the present day, right? Because if you get active trying to fight for police accountability, dealing with like the Black Lives Matter movement or dealing with the immigration justice movement or dealing with these things, and you struggle and you struggle and you don't see a lot of progress right away, you look back and you go, God, why is it we can't win like they used to win? But they didn't. All that work had been going on for a century since emancipation of African descended peoples before any of that stuff actually kicked in. So this is a long distance run. It's not a sprint. This takes time. And so we have to be prepared to really learn the history accurately because that empowers us. You see, the people that led that movement, we remember Dr. King, and as we should, but let's be clear, it wasn't just Dr. King now. It was a lot of people even younger than that. Dr. King was young when he was taken. He was 39 when he was killed. I used to think 39 was old, but I'm 47 now, so that's a baby. 39 is a baby. Right? He was 26 when he led the bus boycott. That's really young. But most of the foot soldiers of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, right, that grew out of the sit-in movement in places like Greensboro and Nashville and other places, right? Most of the foot soldiers of SNCC were 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23 years old, the same age of many of you in this room, and they were no smarter than you, no more capable than you. And I don't believe they were more courageous than you. They just understood that they had a mission and they had a purpose. And in this society, unfortunately, we don't tell you that anymore. That's the only place in which we've devolved. Your brains haven't devolved. Your capacity for doing justice hasn't devolved, but our society has by lying to you and telling you that all these battles have been fought and won. and that we don't have to do that anymore. We become Snapchat nation. I don't mean that in the technological sense. I mean that if Snapchat were a country, it would be this country. Because what does Snapchat do? It allows you to send a video to your friend, and within 10 seconds, it is gone, Jack. It'll never be seen again. Poof. You see it once, and you never have to think about it again. That's what we do as a country with history. That's how we teach it. So it's no surprise that young people don't feel empowered. No surprise that they look at Dr. King and Rosa Parks and Harriet Tubman and a handful of other names they know and think, gosh, I could never be like that, because we don't really know who those folks were. Those were pretty average people that did extraordinary things, just like most of us. And for those of us who are white, we need to connect to the history of white allyship. See, we haven't been taught that either. It's not just that we weren't taught the history of black and brown leadership. We weren't taught the history of white allyship. The only white allies in history that most of us have ever heard of got killed for doing the work. So we've learned about martyrs, but it's very hard to organize a movement around martyrs, isn't it? Because if I ask you to join the movement and everybody that looks like you that ever tried got popped, you're probably not going to want to join the movement. So you can learn about the martyrs, and you should, Viola Liuzzo, James Reeb, Goodman and Schwerner, John Brown, etc. But if that's all you learn about, you'll never join the struggle. You also have to learn about Angelina and Sarah Grimke and John Fee and Jeremiah Everts and people like Bob and Dottie Zellner in the more modern era, and Ann and Carl Braden and Connie Curry and Mary King and so many others, right, who were standing in concert with and in solidarity with black and brown leadership. But if you haven't heard those names, it's not your fault. None of this, in fact, is. I want to make that very clear. It's not anyone in this room's fault that you don't know the stuff I've been talking about. If you don't know, some of you do, but if you don't, it's not your fault. You weren't supposed to know. Because see, if you knew this stuff, if you actually knew that there was a path, particularly for those of us who are white, if we knew at the age of 10, 12, or 15, before we get set in our ways and our ideology gets completely fixed, and now we're out trying to earn a living and support a family later on in life. If we learned as children that there was a path to take to really stand in solidarity with those who are marginalized, if those of us who are men knew that there was a path to take to stand in solidarity with women as the victims of patriarchy, if those of us who were straight and cisgendered knew that there was a path for us as allies, we would likely choose that path. But at least some of us would. But if I don't know the path is there because it's all covered up with brush, I only go down the road I know, which is the road of collaboration, the road of silence, or at best, the road that says, I'm going to sit back and applaud silently and calmly while everybody else does the heavy lifting. That won't get it anymore. One more thing Dr. King would want us to remember, and I would want you never to be fooled by the outward trappings of progress. Progress is important. We have to learn to take our victories where they come and never grow so cynical as to say that nothing has changed and nothing ever will change. Of course, things can change, but they only change when committed people decide that they do. They don't change because the calendar pages turn and the hands on the clock move. That doesn't bring anything inevitably. All of the progress that we've made up to this point was because people were willing to put their lives on the line and not to take no for an answer. It was because young people, mostly, of all colors, races, and ethnicities, were willing to say that they were prepared to lay down their life for the cause of equity and justice, a cause bigger than themselves as individuals. We still have that spirit in many of our young people in this country, and I'm sure many of you in this room, but we get asked to be fooled by the trappings of progress. And people continue to tell us, just keep your head down, work hard, everything will be fine. You don't have to fight these battles anymore. Just go get yours. Don't worry about other people. They'll get theirs or they won't. You just get ahead and do what you have to do. That's our mentality in this country. It's very hyper-individualistic. It takes away any sense of the collective. We have to move past that hyper-individualism into a different kind of ethic. Dr. King talked about that as well. So never be fooled by the outward trappings of progress. Remember that hoping for change doesn't get us anywhere. Hope is a very empty thing. It's a nice word and people use it and throw it around a lot, but it doesn't mean very much, right? It's like I got on a plane this morning and I hoped that it didn't crash. And it didn't, so I was lucky, right? I hoped that it didn't crash, but I had no agency or control over that. I don't know how to fly a plane. I just sit there and trust that people who are flying it know what they're doing. Hope is what you do when you give away your agency to some other power and you just really wish for the best. That's not how change happens. Change happens because you determine to make it happen. Like, I would never hope that my children eat tomorrow. I promise you, my children will eat tomorrow. And if I have to steal in order for them to eat tomorrow, trust me, I will steal in order for them to eat. They will not starve. I will not hope for food to appear. I will make it appear. That's the difference between hope and action, right? Hope is what you do when you've given up on the prospects of action and real change. Action is what you take when you know that hope isn't enough. And hope isn't enough in a time like this. We need more. We need our commitment. We need our voices. We need your passion. We need your energy. And we need your love for your fellow brothers and sisters and everybody else in between on a gender spectrum that is not binary, and we should remember that as well. And we have to be willing to stand up and insist that this work is not what this country tells us this work is about. This work is about what the man and the movement of which he was a part said it was about. So let's reclaim that in the name of truth, in the name of honesty, so we can actually be released from a history that continues to, in many ways, ensnare us. Thank you all so much for being here. I appreciate you.
Wow, I don't know how I'm supposed to follow that, but I did have the pleasure to bring him up, and I do have the pleasure to say, give him one more round of applause. One of the mottos of the organization that I belong to, Black Student Union, is from rhetoric to action. So you take these words, like I said, they were going to be thought-provoking, and I hope you were sitting here thinking about the things he was saying and thinking about how you're going to take them outside of these doors and do something about it. Change isn't comfortable, people, nor is it convenient. Thank you. Now we will have a performance by Mr. Akeem Edwards, followed by the presentation of the Impact Awards. Akeem is a native of Jacksonville, Florida, and a graduating senior psychology major with a minor in criminal justice. He has been involved in many different organizations on campus during his collegiate career, and after graduation, he plans to dance for a prominent dance company while touring internationally. He is the 2015-2016 Homecoming King, founder and president of Pulse Dance Troupe, and he is here to perform a short solo exemplifying the styles of ballet and modern dance. Without further ado, Mr. Akeem Edwards.
Sorry for that. My name is Marlon Lopez, and I will be presenting this, the first year's Student Impact Scholarship Award. The FAU Student Impact Award Scholarship of 2016 was created to award students who display actions of perseverance despite hardships during their college career and are working towards leaving a positive impact at Florida Atlantic University. The scholarship is open to all students regardless of race or ethnicity. Tonight's scholarship recipient is an active member of the FAU community. He is a member of Lambda Theta Phi Latin Fraternity Incorporated and served as the president for the Multicultural Greek Council this past fall of 2015. He founded a club called SMART, which is an acronym for Scientific Mentoring and Academic Research Training, to increase the prevalence of undergraduate research. His own experience with research has resulted in earning an undergraduate research grant, completing his honors thesis project, and earning an internship with one of the top neuroscience research institutes in the nation, Max Planck Florida Institute. In addition, he has contributed 340 hours of community service to FAU's global impact. He aims to one day serve as a physician to gather a specific set of skills in order to alleviate human suffering, both in research and in medicine. In his application, he states, as Will Smith once said, I want the world to be a better place because I was here. This scholarship opportunity will enable me to continue on the path towards making the type of impact I wish on this world. Please join me in congratulating our first Student Impact Scholarship recipient, Mr. Danik Joseph.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Peggy Joseph, and I am one of the Associate Directors in the Office of Diversity and Multicultural Affairs. I have the honor of presenting our Faculty Staff Impact Award. The Faculty Impact Award is presented to a faculty or staff member who has a positive impact on the growth and development of FAU students by going above and beyond to remove barriers and support student success. Accomplished in many areas, we will highlight some of tonight's recipient contributes to the FAU community. 12 years ago, Dr. Jennifer Peluso arrived at Florida Atlantic University to serve as instructor in the Department of Psychology within the Charles E. Smith College of Science. When she assumed the role of the Psychology Department's undergraduate coordinator, Dr. Peluso earned a reputation among students for being a persistent advisor who held students responsible for their success, but who also supported them in their academic journey. Among her colleagues, she became known as a champion for evidence-based teaching practices and continuous assessment of student learning. She helped establish and co-author FAU's Quality Enhancement Plan, Distinction Through Discovery, and helped organize the successful site visits for FAU's re-accreditation by the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools. In 2013, Jenny joined the Provost's office as the Assistant Provost for Student Success. She headed the university's task force on undergraduate student success. Under Dr. Peluso's leadership, the university launched large-scale initiatives such as the Need Help Ask campaign, bachelor's degree flight plans, the Summer Jump Start program, and other components of FAU's successful improvement plan for the state's performance metrics. Most recently, Dr. Peluso assumed the post of Associate Vice President in the Division of Public Service, where she guides the work of the university's task force on community engagement and pre-collegiate programs. Please join me in welcoming our first Faculty Staff Impact Award recipient, Dr. Jennifer Peluso.
Congrats again to your 2 award winners. Give them another round of applause. We just have some wonderful people in the room today. We should all just feel good about that. As we conclude tonight's program, we would like to welcome Dr. Larry Fairman to the stage to provide closing remarks and what would a diversity address be without a formal call to action. Dr. Larry Fairman is a proud alumnus of Florida Atlantic University's class of 2009, holding his degree in higher education for leadership. Dr. Fairman holds an associate graduate faculty position with the College of Education and has served as an adjunct since 2011. Dr. Fairman currently serves as the Executive Director of Housing and Residential Life, overseeing the comprehensive residential living and learning programs, services, and facilities at FAU's Boca Raton and Jupiter campuses. In his role, he also oversees student affairs facilities, operations, assisting the division in furthering its facilities-related goals. Living in Boca Raton with his wife and 2 daughters, Dr. Fairman holds several community-related positions, most notably as division representative and coach for the Soccer Association of Boca Raton. Please welcome Dr. Larry Fairman.
I don't know how I follow the talent that we've seen and heard this evening, but tonight's event, Advancing the Dream Together, reminds us that as students, faculty, and staff, we need to be one FAU. And that's one FAU toward justice. While we're all red hot at athletic events, when we leave these events, too often we retreat back to our individual organizations, the folks that look, act, or think like us, those who are from the same places that we are, and worse yet, some of the members of our university community retreat to being alone. I want to utilize the time I have with you to communicate or to revisit some of the key takeaways that I received from Tim Wise's words, understanding that the lens that I listened, heard, and processed through is most likely different than yours. Tim opened up with understanding the significance beyond the spectacle. Oftentimes we wait for a crisis to act. And in acting in response to the crisis, once the hurt from the crisis is over, our action is over as well. We need to act all day, every day, and not just wait until a crisis arises in order to respond. I personally need to confront my own privilege. I can wake up in the morning and think that it's cold outside. I woke up this morning and was curious about what I should wear, what was most appropriate to balance the weather as well as this event that I was going to be speaking at tonight. However, I need to understand that regardless of how cold I am or how much I think I'm struggling, there are many people that are struggling much more than I do. I have the luxury to be pained by the lack of wireless or the luxury to be pained by the lack of air conditioning, while there are many people that are pained by not knowing where their next meal is going to come from. We need to teach the truth. We need to go to the source, and we need to seek the truth. We need to relearn history. I need to broaden my perspective of both violence as well as nonviolence. The key things that matter are food, shelter, and clothing, regardless of who you are and where you come from. I had the opportunity to go through the tunnel vision experience yesterday, and at the end I was asked which was the most impactful on me. And my response was the fact that people go hungry, don't have shelter, or don't have clothing. Because these are not philosophical issues, these are basic human rights. And of all of the many struggles that as a population of Americans we face, that one is the easiest to solve because it transcends any difference in politics or philosophy. Providing a meal at a community center or donating food is basically like taking ibuprofen for a broken bone. And so while I need to continue to act in those regards, I also need to work harder in order to fix the inequity in the country. I need to begin to look at everything that comes across my desk, across my television, and in my eyes through a lens of justice, and how each of the actions that I take and how I confront the actions that others take lead to justice for all. And finally, as Tim Wise said, I need to go read Baldwin. The tone and tenor of Tim Wise's address tonight was meant to engage. He will leave. However, if we only repeat and we don't act, then his time and his message is no different than the comedians and other entertainers that we see in the auditorium, in the Live Oak, or at our respective events. We need to take his words and use those words in order to act. Before cellular phones, social media, and the internet, we were forced to meet new people. And if we were to have discourse, it would have to have been in person. We exchanged ideas which led to a greater end product. And today we live in a world of retweet, of cut and paste, and while those things can serve useful in the classroom, when it comes to changing and shaping society into the dream that we dream it to be, it takes more than just a right click, a left click, a Control-C, and a Control-V. As I look out into the crowd this evening, I'm proud to see students, faculty, and staff come together for a night of camaraderie and dialogue. At the same time, I'm saddened given the large population of FAU and how few percentage of that folk are currently in this room. And that in itself proves that we are privileged and that the people within our community are privileged and don't necessarily confront their privilege. And so we need to speak out to each of our friends and ask them why they weren't here. What was more important than being called to action? And when we repeat Tim Wise's words, we need to repeat them with the same veracity and call to action as we've heard this evening. You have a short period of time here at FAU. For some of you, it's a year. For others of you who may be starting your journey, you might have 4 or more. You are a piece in the movement, an important piece as the most pervasive issues at FAU, and certainly those in the community or the world at large, will not be solved in just 1 or 4 years. To advance the dream, we most certainly must act together, but we must think both in the present as well as the future. Your mission will not be complete unless not only do you everything that you can do while you're here at FAU, but you continue to act when you leave FAU and leave the clear pathway that Tim alluded to and provide a guiding light for those students that follow you. The Office of Diversity and Multicultural Affairs would like to say a special thank you to everyone who has worked to make this event a success. They invite you to visit Tunnel Vision tomorrow from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. in the majestic Palm Room of the Student Union, followed by a candlelight vigil and a march around campus. I want to thank the Office of Diversity and Multicultural Affairs. I want to thank Tim Wise for sharing his thoughts, his ideas, but most importantly, his call to action with us this evening. I thank everyone for coming and invite you all who RSVP'd to the reception immediately following the conclusion of this program in the Grand Palm Room just across the courtyard of the Student Union. Thank you so much and have a good evening.